Hi everyone, this is Dheeraj Nayal, your host and moderator for this SKILup session with People Search powered by Techstrong. And today's session is deep dived on continuous testing and test automation. Before we go on the introduction of the panelists, some housekeeping items for you. Feel free to utilize the chat section to put in your comments, inputs, any queries you may have for the panelists, and we'll be happy to take it as part of the discussion as long as the time permits. And we like to keep it as interactive as possible. So please do not hesitate to express whatever inputs, comments, feedback, queries you might have, and we would be happy to incorporate it as part of the discussion. So I would like to start the introduction of the panelists. So first up, I would like to introduce Mark Hornbeek. So Mark, a warm welcome to the SkillUp session today. And if you can please introduce yourself for the audience. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thanks for inviting me to this Skill Up session. I certainly appreciate it. And I'll have to be brief because, as you know, my internet connection is a little bit unstable. But yeah, I'm Mark Hornbeek. I'm CEO of a little boutique consulting firm called Engineering DevOps Consulting. I claim I've been doing DevOps for 48 years, long before many people knew what the word was because there wasn't such a word at the time. But the general idea is, for whatever reason, I spent most of my career in helping development and ops people do a lot of automation projects, helping them with that. So certainly out of all of the different topics of DevOps, DevSecOps, SRE, continuous testing is my favorite topic. And it's really at the heart of all of those things. So really enjoy this topic and hope we have a great session if my link stays up.
Thank you, Mark, and we are hoping for the same. So next up, I would like to introduce Adriana. So Adriana is joining us from Toronto, Canada. Over to you, Adriana, to introduce yourself, please.
Thanks. Hey, my name is Adriana Villela. I am currently a developer advocate at Lightstep from ServiceNow. I have a background as a Java software engineer for 16 years before I switched into the wonderful world of DevOps, which has captured my heart ever since. And I've had a range of roles from management to individual contributor, going back and forth a couple of times. And right now, observability is near and dear to my heart. I'm also a CNCF ambassador and a HashiCorp ambassador.
Awesome. And great to have you as part of this session, Adriana. Warm welcome once again.
Thank
And
you.
last but not the least, we have from the beautiful Switzerland, Ishel. So Ishel, a very warm welcome to you. If you can please introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Well, my name is Ixchel. I'm a developer advocate at JFrog, but this is fairly recent, almost like Adriana. I'm coming from Java, from the Java world. So I was a consultant for more than 20 years. I'm very active. For example, I'm a Java champion. I'm a CDF ambassador. I go to conference to speak up, but also to learn a lot. And I also help organize conferences. So I really want, and what is one of my passions, to talk to developers and to help us and me to use the best tools, and or at least try to make our world a little bit better.
That's very well said, Ishel. So thanks again to all the panelists for joining us. And we also had another panelist, Suresh GP, but unfortunately he wasn't able to join due to some exigency in his personal side. But sure enough, like I said, we would like to keep the discussion as interactive as possible. So feel free to have your comments, inputs in the chat section. All right, so as part of the topic for this session, continuous testing. So as we know, continuous testing is already a well-established practice in the software development industry. And it is part of the larger DevOps approach and is used to ensure that code changes are constantly tested throughout the software development cycle. And especially in 2023, it's likely that continuous testing has continue to evolve and gain even more prominence in the industry. So right now we are talking about AI-driven testing, shift-left testing, containerization and microservices testing, security testing. There are compliance and regulatory testing. So a lot of these sections are evolving as we speak, especially with the hype around generative AI. So in this session, we like to keep it aligned with different segments, right? From the fundamentals, talking about a bit deep dive on the continuous testing, and then the future trends which we anticipate as part of the overall development. So the first segment, we would like to dive into the fundamental part about what is continuous testing, what are the best practices and frameworks associated with continuous testing. So we'll start with you, Mark, to share your inputs and experience also based on working with different clients around that. Over to you, Mark.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. I'm going to be testing my link, unfortunately. So continuous testing, to me is kind of the heartbeat of many of these other frameworks, Agile, DevOps, DevSecOps, and SRE, because, a lot of those processes depend on getting testing right. But continuous testing itself is only a part of the bigger picture of software quality assurance and software quality engineering. But, if I was to define continuous testing, there is no standard, as you probably know, but the definition that I use, I say continuous testing is a quality assessment strategy in which most the tests are automated and integrated as a core and essential part of a DevOps value stream. So that's how I, refer to it. And certainly it's much more than simply automating test execution. There's a lot more to it than that, but fundamentally it's continuous testing is a quality assessment strategy associated with DevOps.
Right. And if you'd like to elaborate some of the best practices and some of the framework which works from your side, Mark?
Oh, sure. I mean, I say there are 8 pillars of practices with continuous testing. So the different tenets of continuous testing, so things like shift left, fail early, fail fast, relevance. So, there's 5, and then leadership and culture. Really, it affects how well testing is accepted and sponsored, and to what extent people, collaborate around tests across the whole value stream and the different cross-functional groups. Test strategies and planning is a pillar. That doesn't go away just because you're doing continuous testing, although I'm shocked that many people seem to think so. And then test management, which includes, keeping track of different versions of tests and being smart about that for the different stages. And then test automation, which is kind of the heart of continuous testing and what most people think about. But automation is more than just executing tests, but a lot of the other aspects of automation around testing. Testing tools, of course, is another pillar. Test environment management, and finally test results and analysis. So to me, those are the key practice areas, and each one of them have many specific practices to master as you go from a low level of maturity to a high level of maturity of DevOps as well as testing, continuous testing.
Thank you, Mark. And there were lots of good SKILup snippets there talking about test automation. We will dive a bit deeper on the next segment about it as well. And also the leadership involvement, the stakeholder involvement as part of the best practices is one of the key factor of success that comes in within the software testing approach. So thanks for elaborating that. I'll come to you, Ishal, to provide your inputs around what is continuous testing and some of the best practices and frameworks from your side to share with the audience. Over to you, Ishal.
Well, thank you. For me, continuous, well, not for me, but as Mark said, sadly, there is not an official definition that everybody is following. And so we already have a loosely but very well framed definition by Mark. So I'm bringing the developer perspective because that's the perspective I lived for so many years. And for me is the shift of developers into thinking about all the things that we can test and all the things that we can avoid by creating a complete suite or set of different tests. But it also begins with the mindset. For example, we had different types of approach to testing, from TDD. So develop first the test, and then develop the features. We have created tools to create automatic tests around our code, which only represents what is there. We have had other type of frameworks where we describe user cases instead of focusing in how the business logics is implemented. I'm going to tell you a story, what this application should do. So testing has evolved from the developer perspective in many, many ways. And if you come to me and ask, what is the best from a structure of how to create tests, like what programming language, what framework, what type of test, I will answer you as a consultant and I tell you it all depends. It all depends on your use case. It all depends on your programming languages. It all depends on how much budget do you want and you're willing to invest in this, which in my answer is your budget for testing should be as high as your production budget. Like every single line of code that you're shipping, it should be as important as every single line of testing that you create. So I can go on and tell people what are the things that you should look into a tool, should look into a different process about how to implement tests that is efficient and it's reliant and is resilient and is not so expensive. Because what I have said just is like, we're going to create or we're going to spend as much time in our production code as our testing code. So for the poor developer, now you have twice the code to either create or at least manage or validate or check or maintain.
Right, and that's very well elaborated, Ishel. Thanks for that, because I think even the choice of framework we talk about in continuous testing, like you were explaining, depends on various factors like the technology stack, programming language, testing requirements of your project, and then the budget and the cost associated with that. So really appreciate of you highlighting that as part of it. And last but not the least, over to you, Adriana, about your views about what is continuous testing, best practices, and framework that works around continuous testing. Over to you, Adriana.
Thanks. So I think Michelle and Mark made some really awesome points. So totally agree with both of them. And the thing that I would like to add to that is, first of all, I think continuous testing, when you boil it down, is a set of practices, and you have to get into the practice of making sure that you're testing your code first and foremost, right? It's not something that we should ignore, not do, which is why like shifting left is so important. But also the idea that testing is a team sport. It is not the responsibility of just your QA team. It is not the responsibility of just your developers. And also like keeping in mind that testing continues even when you're in production, because after all, the best testers you will ever have are your users. And they're the ones who are going to find those gnarly ass problems that you never even anticipated. So, and on that similar vein, like one thing that I wanted to mention in terms of practices for continuous testing is something that's, I think, a little bit newer in the testing world. Maybe not quite so new, but this idea of, because observability is near and dear to my heart, the idea of observability-driven development, whereby you keep observability in mind as you're writing your code. So you're adding those traces to your application code, and then you can take advantage of those traces through trace-based testing, where your QA folks can take those traces and use tools like Trace Test and Malaby and Helios to create tests from your traces, so that they can run automated integration tests. They can use that information to go back to the developer and say, hey, there's a problem with the code, and I think I know what the problem is. And also making sure that the code that's being delivered to your SRE team is actually code that hopefully isn't like it is in decent functioning order, because there's no such thing as perfect code.
Can I inject a comment on that?
Sure, Mark.
Since we're in
Please
a
go
panel discussion. Yeah, so I like the idea of, how
I think we lost him.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Right in
I'm
the,
on the edge of my seat.
right at the question.
Yes, I think you would be joining us back. So, meanwhile, about Adriana's input. So, I think also coming in from the observability side, Adriana, the importance of monitoring and alerts in continuous testing, like setting up monitoring and alerts to track the health of your testing environment and the success rate of test runs is so critical, because this helps to detect and address any problems early on as part of the overall approach. So really appreciate that inputs from your side. So as part of each of the panelists inputs about what is continuous testing and what are the frameworks. So we elaborated that by adopting continuous testing and leveraging suitable testing frameworks, teams can achieve faster development cycles, higher software quality, and enhance collaboration between development and testing teams. And we also have Mark back. So, Mark, you were
sorry, I don't know where
mentioning
it
something
dropped. I was just,
right from the
agreeing
start.
with Adriana that observability is a key element of certainly getting to higher levels of continuous test capability. To be able to observe systems in all of its states that are important from the point of view of validation and testing and quality. But I would only add to that the complement is controllability. In other words, testability equals controllability plus observability. You needed to be able to drive the system into the states that you can then observe what you're expecting it to do. That was the only thing I was adding there.
Yeah, and that's something which we were trying to summarize as part of the overall inputs from each of the panelists here. So appreciate that, Mark. So, like I was saying, hopefully the audiences have got a gist of what is continuous testing, what are some of the best practices, some of the frameworks associated with that. And as part of the next segment, we will dive a bit deeper talking about continuous testing and test automation. How is it different? How is it related? So, would like to grab each of the thoughts from the panelists here. So, we'll start again with you, Mark, before we lose out in some fashion. So, over to you, Mark.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the link. It doesn't seem to be stable here, but so if you I think your question was, how does automated testing relate to continuous testing, or maybe I didn't understand the question properly.
So the continuous testing and test automation, how is it related? How is it different? So if you would like to share your inputs, I think that would be helpful for the audience.
Well, this is also kind of a myth. I think many people think of them as equal. Okay, continuous testing is just automating a bunch of tests, but in reality, there's much more to it than that. The execution of tests is only part of what is important. You also have to set up test environments. You have to, select the tests. You have to be able to, run, set up the data for the testing, and then run the tests, and then get the results, and then analyze the results, and determine the verdicts, and rerun the tests. So there's a lot of other practices other than just executing tests. Continuous testing embodies all of those things, and often people underestimate, what it really takes to do continuous testing properly. And that's true for not only, one type of test, as you mentioned before. There are many types of tests throughout the value stream, and that whole cycle is relevant for every one of those types of tests. So there's a lot to it to get it right. Yeah, certainly to get the highest level of continuous testing maturity or performance. There's a lot to it there. Yeah.
Right. And that is why continuous testing and test automations are related but distinct concept in the software development and testing domain. Either it's the definition or the scope or the time of execution or the objectives associated with that. So I'll move to Adriana to share her perspective about continuous testing and test automation. How is it related? How is it different? Over to you, Adriana.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely agree with Mark in terms of the statement that like they are not equivalent. They complement each other. Continuous testing isn't just test automation. I think continuous testing, the important thing is like making sure that we are like it's in the words, right? Making sure that we are constantly testing. We are, because like it or not, we are always constantly testing our code and not forgetting about that. The other thing that I wanted to mention in terms of continuous testing, that I would like there to be more discourse in the community around this topic would be like in terms of like chaos engineering, because we talk about testing in a controlled environment, but what about that uncontrolled environment? And it is so scary when you encounter something working under like weird circumstances. But again, like our users using our products out in the wild are the ultimate chaos engineers. So being able to embrace the chaos engineering practice as part of your continuous testing practice is extremely important. And to kind of get out of this mindset of like, oh my God, this is scary because it's unpredictable, because yeah, it's absolutely terrifying. But if we get into that habit of like, these weird, unpredictable situations and just getting used to dealing with them, I think that'll help overall with overall quality of our software.
Can I inject a comment about that, Ariana? There were two things. One thing you were talking about was, you were touching on what does continuous mean in the word, in continuous testing. And that resonates with me because testing is one of the few things you really can do continuously. And if you're doing it effectively, you really are able, there's no such thing as 100% testing. So with whatever time you have, test the heck out of it as much as you can, right? Being careful about what test you're going to run, but at the same time, you use the opportunity to run as whatever test you can, because there's never such thing as 100% quality or 100% testing. As opposed to, let's say, continuous integration, you can't really do truly continuous integration because you only can integrate when there's something to integrate. But testing, you can literally do continuously, and you probably should, right, if you've got the ability to do it. So that's one point. And the other point about your idea of chaos engineering being important. In general, I always think of chaos engineering as a very creative kind of, idea.
And I think Chaos Monkey has kind of interjected Mark's thought there. So we'll take a break before Mark's come in there to bring him back with his thought. But in the meantime, we'll bring in Ishel as part of that. So Ishel, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Okay. So on my side, first of all, where we deploy our software, it's totally different. So we have to have that in mind. The next comment I want to make is tests are not the same. So there are tests that should be or can be run every single process or every single cycle of the development in for example, the developer machine. The other thing that I have seen in my career is that we are bound by our imagination. We are bound by the environments that we create in terms of testing. And it has been surprising for me to see, for example, when we are trying to test a system that is going to be deployed in an environment that we are disregarding. For example, software for smartphones, and turns out that most of the clients are going to be in an area that where the network is not that reliant, and we are testing our software very close to our data centers with huge amounts of power, the newest devices, and the best network ever. So testing in itself has a huge universe that you have to have into considerations, from the bounds created by our own imagination to the technology that you're using for testing, where you're testing, how are you, like what is the purpose even of your software, and how it's going to be deployed. And you also, I totally agree with Adriana. uh, Observability, it should be present not only in our development and deployment, but also to gather all this information about how the system is behaving, because there there is not going to be bound by the imagination of the developers of what can go wrong. There is a real thing, like we will have the most creative user trying to abuse the tools, and that's okay. I mean, that is okay. We, even as a developers, are the first thing that we want to do is to test the limits of our tools and go beyond what is allowed. So continuous testing. Another thing that is really important for me: not everything can be automatized or automatic. There are things that you still, for their nature or the prevalence in our software development cycle, have to be done in a different way. I'm not saying manual, but I'm saying in a different way. So continuous testing is all that you require to at least have a set of tests that you want to run for sure before every single release cycle of your software. And thinking that you also have the next, or the last stage, which is deployment and running and observing. That also brings back information into your software development lifecycle feedback loop.
Hey, it looks like Dheeraj is having to refresh, so I'll just step in while he's doing that.
Cool.
So Adriana, do you have anything you that Michelle mentioned that really stood out to you, or anything that you pushed back against?
I actually agree with everything that Ishel said. Very, very well put. I think going back to like your comment on the testing, right? Not all testing has to be automated. There is still very much a need for exploratory testing. And it shouldn't be underestimated in any way. So that, I want to give a little shout out to exploratory testing, because people there, in this DevOps world, it's like automate, but there is still a need for that.
Yeah.
It looks like Dheeraj is having a little bit of issues, so I've just I was pulling up a bit of resources. So let's just go ahead and continue right on ahead, everyone. So Mark, while we got you with us, when you're looking at a team structure, who do you think should own continuous testing?
Very good question, because again, just like there's no hard one answer. The main thing is that if you go back to Dr. Deming, the late great Edward Deming's idea, everybody owns quality, and testing is an element of quality. So it's not like any one group, and that's one of the problems with traditional thinking on testing is, if you go back to Meyer's teachings, I always have a problem with that. He said that, an independent group should test because there's a conflict of consciousness between developers and testers. And so you want somebody separate to do it, which I fully disagree with. What you want is everybody to be trained on testing and have the resources to do testing, and do testing well, and make it part of everybody's thinking and quality. So, the short answer is, the entire cross-functional team owns continuous testing, and there are testing aspects to everybody's job. If you think about everything you do in a day, I don't even care what your job is, whether it has anything to do with DevOps or not. There's a lot of testing involved, right? You're testing your environment. You're trying to see if something's working. You're trying to validate it. You're trying to, adjust according to what you find. So it's everybody's job, basically. In terms of one ownership, I mean, I do like the idea of having some experts around, as kind of a platform team, shall we call it, and some embedded experts, that maybe have certain things that they kind of own, just because it's good to have some experts around on certain complex topics. But overall, everybody owns it. That's my answer. Am I still on?
Yes, Mark.
Okay. Yeah.
We're
Sorry.
listening, and
Yeah.
I actually agree totally with you. My suggestion there is, as you said, everybody in the team should be enabled to create tests, to follow the best practices that the team or the organization has defined. I like to think that we have to have accountability, but we also need to have some specialized. And what I have seen in the different organizations that I work with. You have a team that is leading the effort into improving not only the test, but the process and the tools and testing, so they can create a whole stack of tools for one side, best practices, and start to creating this as a service, or close as a service or a platform for the entire organization and the different development teams. And I think pair programming is one of the things that helps increase the quality of the source code. But also pair programming is going to reduce this self-certified way of thinking, because that was the first or one of the drawbacks of saying a developer has to write their own test, not in the TDD way, but in a way of, I'm responsible for writing my test. And most of the critique was around it's going to be self-certification, because you are implementing the code, so you know exactly what is going to happen, and it's not going to be helpful in terms of really testing the boundaries. But for me, one of the things that you can actually do, or your team can do, is treat testing as production code. So also involve pair programming there. And with that, we will reduce this narrow or very, very self-certified kind of way of producing either code or tests. And yeah, I think I could cover everything I wanted to say on that.
So, of course, I have a comment too. The idea that, everybody should own their own testing, and this idea of test-driven development in general, not just test-driven development at the unit level, but even at the application level and other things. The idea I have found, it really does work. It's hard to get people convinced to try it, but once people really experience TDD, ATDD and similar things, and see how well it works, it actually catches on, but it takes a while to get it going. In my experience, it's counterintuitive, but the products that have the least number of testers, but the best test support and culture of testing, have the higher quality. In fact, it's a little bit embarrassing. Most of the very large projects I've seen, there's almost an inverse relationship between the number of independent testers and the quality of the product. You really want everybody to be, really feeling and living this idea of making testing and quality part of their job. And then you get more efficiency overall.
Thanks, Mark, and sorry for the interruption in between because of some of the connectivity issues. So I'm back again, and I think we have been talking about who owns continuous testing. And as part of the continuous testing, I think one of the important factors when we talk about continuous testing and test automation, which support the DevOps principles of delivering high quality software rapidly and reliably. And as each of the panelists has been mentioning, that by automated testing and continuously validating code changes, DevOps teams can achieve faster development cycles, reduce time to market, enhance collaboration, and increase confidence in the software qualities. And these practices contribute to the overall success of DevOps implementation and improve the end user experience as part of it. And then in the same segment, and I think very much aligned with the hype which we are seeing with the generative AI, which with the AI coming into the mainstream, that how AI and ML is machine learning is changing continuous testing, because artificial intelligence and machine learning are significantly impacting continuous testing by introducing new capabilities and enhancing existing practices. So it would be very interesting to hear from our panelists here their thoughts about how AI and AML will impact continuous testing as part of the overall domain. So we'll start with you, Adriana, to share your perspective, please.
Yeah, so I think, AI, ML, super hot topic these days. And I think some folks in the tech world are a little bit scared by it, thinking that, oh no, it's going to take our jobs away. But, I've been having conversations with various people over the last couple of weeks about this, and really, like, we should embrace these technologies as job enhancers, right? They should complement the work that we do. So I definitely see these as assistive tools that, might maybe it's like interacting with ChatGPT. Like, sometimes you ask ChatGPT some questions and it doesn't give you quite the response that you're looking for, but it sparks a little something in your brain and you're like, maybe I'll take a little bit of this idea here and a little bit of that idea there. And so it can ignite the spark of creativity. So I see using AI and ML in continuous testing is a similar sort of thing, an assistive tool that can give us superpowers, enhance our testing abilities, and give us an extra little spark of creativity.
Right, and that kind of ties up quite nicely with user experience testing as well, because AI and ML can analyze user behavior and feedback to understand how users interacts with the overall application. And then this data can be used to improve testing strategies and prioritize user-centric testing around that. So thanks for highlighting that, Adriana. I'll come to you, Ishel, to share your perspective around how AI and ML are transforming continuous testing. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, it is a tool. It's not the most reliable tool right now. It will continue to evolve. So the capabilities that we will see in the near future are going to be totally different from what we have today. What we have today, as you mentioned, it's going into either unit testing or user experience. Like, you give a site and it will try to create all these usabilities type of tests. Right now, it's my understanding that even though it is advertised as reducing the flakiness of tests, it still lands on the very flaky results, even for UI testing. On the unit testing part, it is, we had this discussion in the past with technologies, at least, for example, in the Java world with Lombok, that try to minimize the amount of code that you needed to write. But behind the scenes, this tool was going to create a lot of byte code for you. And some people were like, no, I don't want this to generate source bytecode because I don't know what's going to happen. And they decided that they wanted to generate source code. And there are people who were like, if we generate source code, then I have to maintain it. So you are creating more work for me in the long run, because every single code that I am adding, it has to be maintained by a human. And it is true. I totally agree with that assessment, but it is also important that we understand that as a tool, it's providing us with options. I wouldn't go and say, let's replace all or most or this type of test and let them create it, because we need to be very, very careful with the decisions we're taking. For example, as I said, unit testing, it's mostly doesn't understand the semantics of our code. So that means that the tests are like the carbon copy, the other part of our code, which it is, yes, good for big refactors, not so good for new applications where you actually want to test something else beside what is there. But yes, I think we will have a new tool, and I think it's powerful, and I think in its current evolution, it I agree with Adriana. It's in the stage of sparking new ideas, of exploring new ways of doing it. But I wouldn't trust it just yet.
Right, yeah. So I think it's still a evolving domain and will keep on evolving every year. But I think with the kind of support from the industry, the organization, from the professionals, and this is something which I think could be a part of that adaptive testing, AI-driven testing frameworks can dynamically adjust test scenarios based on real-time data and application behavior, leading to more relevant and effective testing. So I think it would be really interesting to see how this will be evolving in the coming years as well. Mark, are you still here with us?
Yes, I may
Yeah,
differ a little bit. I see uh, these large language models like ChatGPT really a game changer already for a lot of the testing stages in terms of productivity. I mean, I actually have teams that I work with where we've embraced even just ChatGPT and others, but even just that one, and took re-looked at all the different stages of automated testing and test planning and test execution, test creation, test analysis. And it's remarkable how much time you save, right? You can take a document, feed it into Chat GPT. It could be a requirements document or a design document. And you can basically just ask it, what is testable in this document? It'll tell you. I mean, yeah, you do have to check it, but it's amazing how much time it saves. If you were to do that manually, you could spend several days and get other people checking things, to help you. With ChatGPT, it's hours, not days, right? And then you can say, all right, if those are the requirements, what are the test cases that you need to correspond to those requirements? Again, it's hours, not days. And then, okay, let's code the tests in whatever testing language you happen to be using it. And again, it will do that, and it'll help you in hours, not days. So it's a true game changer, in my opinion. Right? It's already right, even in the current form, and it's only going to get better. There was a really interesting report by the Deloitte State of Software Quality 2023. There were a couple of others as well, but that one struck me, where it was talking about the potential for test automation and the use of AI and ML, and pretty much every area of the testing cycle and testing process. It's pointing out that already almost half of the people responding to those surveys are engaging with AI already, right? Test case generation, test data generation, defect analysis, test optimization, prioritization, maintenance. Go down the whole list. There's like 13, 14 different areas that it listed, and all of them are already being engaged very significantly. So in my mind, AI is already a game changer, and it's going to only get better. But I do agree, trust but verify. So a lot of the responses, the system does have an opportunity to hallucinate and all that and go off on a tangent. But already I find it very, very powerful for testing.
absolutely. And I don't know, Mark, if you remember our conversation sometime back when we were talking about zero touch automation, right? And uh, talking about self-healing codes. So I think self-healing test powered by AI can also identify and fix issues in automated test scripts autonomously, because when changes in the application causes test failures, then ML algorithms can adapt the test scripts to the new application behavior, ensuring the tests remain up to date and relevant, providing that acceleration towards self-healing test.
Well,
So,
there's a really good point there. I mean, if you extrapolate a little bit, this idea of test-driven development, where you create the tests along with the code, you know, with tools like ChatGPT, you can actually create the code and the tests for the code at the same time and validate each other as you go along. So there's a lot of interesting use cases that are going to save a huge amount of time. People that are a little bit afraid of automation, a lot of testers are a little bit nervous about automation because they haven't been a programmer before or something. A lot of them are manual testers. They no longer need to be afraid, right? They now have a tool that's going to accelerate their, ability to contribute with automated testing. So that's just, yet one example. The ones that don't do that those are the ones that are going to have their jobs at risk. But if they embrace it and use it as a tool, then, they're going to be in high demand.
So I totally agree with you, Mark, in that regard. It's a tool and it's going to be a game changer tool in our industry. What I want, and you mentioned the hallucination part of ChatGPT that is still happening. I mean, we are even developing now security attacks based on this hallucination. Like they go and check what are the APIs that ChatGPT has tried to suggest to users that is not even implemented just yet, and they will implement it and publish into the different registries, and the next one that asks for the same answer will have like, you should only like implement this API from this package, and it turns out that the package now exists, but it's mostly malicious code. So yes, there is still answers that it's coming from there, that if you don't have the experience, the criteria, or this curious and skeptical mind, you need to actually interact with this particular tool. It's going to spell some troubles. And the other avenue that it's really interesting that people have in mind before embarking into this is optimization for these tools can mean something totally different to what we mean as optimization. I don't know if you have, one of the founders of OpenAI was telling about, like, for example, the boat optimization game. And they were trying to optimize in a specific game. And turns out the best optimization was having this boat in flames only circling around a lake instead of reaching the goal first prize. So this was like optimizing the score, but not in the way we wanted. So now we need a new set of skills, which is really, really specify what we want in the best way possible to interact with this new tool.
Yeah, I would say that was always true, though, right? I mean, this idea of hallucinations, I know a lot of people that hallucinate all the time. And you definitely want to check their work. And, I don't think this idea of applying intelligence and getting peer reviews and all of that goes away just because we have an automated, tool. So I agree with all of that, but it's interesting, right? People, I'm a little bit defensive on the side of defending these AI tools because I'm amazed at how much they can do, given that they're still early stage. 2 years from now, wow, right? A lot of these issues are going to be, put under control much better, I believe. And it's good to embrace them now rather than put them aside. There's a lot of value already, even though there are all these limitations.
right. And I think we all agree that as AI and ML continue to advance, they will likely play an even more crucial role in shaping the future of continuous testing. But of course, there is definitely the requirement of compliance, regulations, ethical practices built around that so that it is also safer and both optimized in terms of the efficiency and efficacy as part of the benefits it's provided to the industry. So I think it will be fascinating to see in the times ahead. So again, I appreciate the inputs from each of the panelists, and this now brings us to the last segment in which we tend to share our inputs around the future trends, the emerging new roles and careers in continuous testing, which we anticipate. And I think it's also quite interesting time based on the Future of Job report, which were released by World Economic Forum, in which AI was basically empowering every role, every domain, and every vertical as part of it. But for audience references, would like to have the panelists' inputs about what they think about different roles which are going to emerge in continuous testing as part of the next 2 to 5 years, let's say, so that it's relevant for the audiences to focus on which areas they need to upskill and reskill themselves. So we'll start with you, Mark, if that's all right for you. Are you still with us, Mark? You're on mute.
I'm trying to unmute. Can you hear me?
You are. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I hope so. So I see testing, the future of testing going to a higher level than we currently think about it, right? At a more abstract level.
Ooh.
Oh no. It's always during the juicy bits.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
You're back?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, I got a screen blank for a second. Looking at the bigger picture of not only individual, software modules, but at the systems level and treating systems at a higher level, I think the abstraction capabilities being provided by some of these newer tools allows you to do that, to look at the bigger picture and to really start integrating user inputs more and other system level inputs more, integrating your performance metrics and outcomes together with testing requirements and tests.
So lost him again. So I think we will
Individuals being
have
more
him back.
engaged with automated testing and continuous testing all the way through the whole process, rather than having big separate QA teams. I'm not saying big separate QA teams should necessarily go away, but certainly, getting developers more involved because they have the capabilities to do so, and they're going to have, tools at their fingertips, is going to be very helpful. So engaging with that is really where I think the best organizations are going to be going. That's my own opinion.
Right, and we lost you a bit in between, Mark, as part of the explanation. But I also think around AI ops, I think AI ops will blend AI and ML technologies with IT operations and testing, requiring that AI ops testing analyst to manage and analyze automated testing processes within the IT operation domain. So something as an emerging role within the system thinking as part of the broader context as well. So I'll go with Ishel this time to talk about what you think, Ishel, within the industry about the roles and emerging roles it will impact in the next 2 to 5 years within continuous testing.
Okay, well, first of all, I think what Adriana mentioned at the very beginning about observability and instrumentation of our different applications being the next frontier or the next thing that we should be considering. And I totally agree with her. Now we have this avenue to bring more information back into the software development process to improve the quality. And this marriage, it's going to create more interesting projects, roles, tools in that regard. Not only observability for the sake of the production application, but also how it's going to be even helping testing and even helping the new release cycle. The other thing is machine learning. Yes, for sure. This is actually what Mark said. It's interesting. It's going to allow for more things to happen more quickly. And that means that we will be able to see systems as more as as black boxes before. But let me tell you, like, I still believe with our traditional testing, unit test, integration, consumer and producer test, UI, UX is still needed. We are not saying that we're moving away from it. It still is important. And that's the other thing in my way of thinking. We will still need to create many, like developers will need, or QA and test people need to create their own tests, because we still need the human expertise and experience and knowledge. So my suggestion there is find the tools that you feel they are as flexible and strong like that. For example, as a developer, I have two. My two favorite one is test containers and Warmock. What they are my favorite ones? Because they are on top of any programming language. And if I move to a different project, it chances are it doesn't matter what programming language we're using, what technology stack, they are resilient and they are universal enough that we can implement it. And we are as good as our tools, and not only as our tools, but at how we learn and how we use our tools. So that's my second suggestion to the audience. First is learn, like, choose carefully your tools, learn them so you're a master of your tools. And third one, how to choose a tool. Well, I will tell you what are my criteria for choosing a tool. And I mentioned them. It has to be abstract enough, flexible enough, and efficient enough to make my life easier. But if you want more into that, there are foundations that are creating and pushing out standards. And many tools are going to start implementing those standards. So go for a tool that is part of a standard that has a high adopt rate. That would be my actionable takeaways from this.
Absolutely, and that's very well explained, Ishel. I think that also provides more of a multi-dimensional approach for the professionals to analyze where they need to put their focus and efforts in order to have that kind of upskilling and reskilling approach. Last but not the least, over to you, Adriana, to share your perspective.
Yeah, so my thought, as far as where continuous testing is going, embrace the observability, especially trace-based testing. We are observability is a hot topic these days. We are instrumenting our code. We're slapping traces on our code. Let's take advantage of stuff that's already coming in and use trace-based testing to add to our test toolkit. The other thing I would say is making sure that we are not afraid of running those chaos tests, because unpredictable is definitely what we get in production. And of course, in quoting charity majors, test in prod. I mean, we essentially test in prod whenever we are users of a system. Don't be afraid of that, but having the mechanisms in place to, give us that feedback when things go bad in prod. That's where our observability comes in. So then we are less afraid of what the results of these live tests are, because we have the information at hand to be able to troubleshoot.
Right. And again, really insightful tips for the professionals. And overall, summarizing each of the panelists here, I think as technology continues to advance, new opportunities will keep on rising and creating a dynamic and exciting landscape for professionals in the field of continuous testing. And one thing which I would like to add as part of it is also the DevSecOps testing, because as security becomes an integral part of the DevOps pipeline, DevSecOps testing professionals or having that kind of skills will focus on integrating security testing into the continuous testing process, ensuring that the security vulnerabilities are identified and addressed early in the development lifecycle, making it a very lucrative skill set for any professional. So hoping as part of this session, the audience were able to get a lot of SKILup insights, a lot of SKILup exposure around what's happening in the industry. And we'll keep on bringing these SKILup sessions with additional experts in the next series of webinars as well. But at this time, would like to really thank Ishel, would like to really thank Adriana as well as Mark, who left a bit early, for their time and efforts of providing their inputs, their experience coming in from different roles in the industry for the wider audience. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks so
and
much.
this session is definitely recorded, so you can also view this session later on demand as well. So thanks again to the audience for their time, and we'll see you next time around for the next SKILup session. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.